Ask a child to sit still for 10 minutes, and it can feel like an entire afternoon has gone missing. Ask most adults to look back on the last 10 years, and it can feel like barely any time passed at all. Same number of minutes. Same clock, ticking at exactly the same speed it always has. And yet somewhere between childhood and now, time seems to have quietly changed its pace, without ever actually changing at all. There's a particular kind of summer that only seems to exist in childhood, the kind that felt, at the time, like it might genuinely never end. 3 months could hold what feels, in memory, like an entire era. A new friendship, a skill learned from nothing, a version of yourself at the start of June that barely resembled the one standing there in September. Compare that to a random 3 months as an adult. A Tuesday folds into a Wednesday, folds into a Thursday that felt suspiciously like the one before it. An entire season can pass, and afterward, when asked what happened, the honest answer is often, not much. It just went. Ask that same adult about one specific week years ago. The week they moved somewhere new or started something unfamiliar, and the detail can come back with almost childlike clarity. The contrast is telling. It may have more to do with what filled the time than with age itself. Here's one way of looking at it that can reframe the whole question. For a 5-year-old, a single year is a fifth of everything they've ever lived. It's enormous, a real, substantial fraction of their entire existence so far. For someone turning 50, that same 12 months is 1/50th of their life. Identical length, on identical calendars. But measured against everything that came before it, it's a sliver, a much smaller slice of an ever-growing pie. Nobody sits a child down and explains this. It isn't something you're taught. It's something that quietly happens to you, one birthday at a time, as each new year gets divided into a smaller and smaller portion of the total. But the math alone doesn't fully explain it. There's something else going on, something closer to how a life actually gets stored in memory, rather than just how it's measured. Picture a drive you've taken 100 times, the commute, the route to a familiar place. The first time, every turn registers. The 10th time, most of it fades into the background. By the 100th time, you can arrive somewhere and barely remember the drive at all, as if you'd simply teleported there. That's not really about the road. One possible explanation is that it's about what the mind chooses to hold on to. Something already seen once doesn't need to be studied as closely the second time, so it often doesn't leave behind as vivid a trace the 10th or the 100th time around, which means a life full of routine, recognizable mornings. Familiar routes, the same rooms in the same order, can end up leaving behind fewer distinct memories to look back on. And a stretch of time with few distinct memories tends to feel, in hindsight, like it barely happened. It's worth noticing which days survive this and which don't. A wedding, a first house, a single ordinary Tuesday that happened to hold a phone call nobody saw coming. These days rarely blur, no matter how many routine years surround them, as if the mind quietly files certain moments under a different label the instant they happen, one marked worth keeping. There's a modern twist worth adding to this. This may be the most thoroughly self-documented generation yet. Thousands of photographs, saved messages, a location tagged on nearly every outing. And yet all that documentation doesn't appear to slow the feeling down much. A phone full of photos from an entire year can be scrolled through in under a minute. Solid proof that something happened, without necessarily returning the feeling of how long it actually took to happen. Maybe the record and the memory are two different things entirely. One can be stored with perfect accuracy and still feel, somehow, weightless. There's a strange trick hiding in this. The days themselves don't feel short while you're living them. A long meeting still drags. A slow afternoon at work still crawls by, minute by minute, exactly the way it always has. It's only afterward, looking back, that the whole stretch collapses, a month's worth of long, slow days somehow adding up to what feels like no time at all in the rearview mirror. In other words, time seems to run on two entirely different clocks. One ticks while you're inside a moment, and it can move painfully slowly. The other appears to run only in memory, looking backward, and that one can speed up the moment nothing new gets left behind to measure it by. It's an odd kind of trade. The moment feels slow while it's happening and short once it's gone, as if time only agrees to hand over speed in exchange for being endured first. If novelty may play a significant role here, it raises a curious possibility. Maybe the sense of speed isn't entirely fixed. Some people describe a strange effect after a trip somewhere unfamiliar, a week away that, in memory, expands to feel closer to a month, simply because nearly everything in it was new. New streets, new food, new faces, all landing as fresh material for memory to hold on to. It's worth being careful here. This isn't a formula, and it isn't a guarantee. Nobody can bottle novelty and dose it out to slow a life down on command. But it's an interesting detail worth simply noticing. The years that usually stand out loudest in memory are rarely the routine ones. They're typically the ones where something changed. Here's something almost comforting buried in all of this. Many people who grow older seem to notice some version of the same thing. In many generations, across many eras, people often arrive at some point in adulthood and quietly think some version of the same sentence. Where did the time go? It isn't a personal failing. It isn't something happening only to you. It's simply part of what it means to keep living long enough to have a past worth comparing the present to. There's something almost strange about that shared confusion. Across generations and centuries, many people seem to be quietly startled by the exact same trick of the mind, and yet somehow it still often catches each new person off guard. So maybe the next time a year seems to have disappeared without asking permission, it's worth pausing on one small, strange detail. The clock never sped up. It's still counting the same seconds it always has. What changed was how much of it got noticed. How much of it left something behind worth remembering. Ask that same child from the beginning to sit still for 10 minutes, and the whole world seems to hold its breath waiting for it to end. That restlessness might not be something to outgrow so much as something worth quietly borrowing back every once in a while. Not to make time behave, but simply to notice it again while it's still passing. The years will keep arriving either way, at the same steady pace they always have. What's still undecided is how many of them get noticed on the way through. If there's a specific stretch of your own life that still feels closer than it has any right to, you probably already know exactly which one it is. Thanks for spending this time with me. There's more where this came from.